It says we are live. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Brendan Baylod, and welcome to Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. Let's give it a few minutes for people to join. We have a very special guest tonight. It's the kickoff of Season 3 of Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. So hopefully we have a great season ahead of you. I know we have a great evening ahead of you tonight. It's going to be kind of a by the seat of my pants season, just like the last one, simply because I'm kind of lining these things up as I go. I've got quite a few presenters lined up that I still have to set dates for. So if you're one of those people and you're kind of watching, you notice, who is this Baylod guy and what's this show about? And you're ready to, you're interested in being on the show, give me an email. I'm always looking for new guests who are doing interesting things in the area of Great Lakes shipwreck research and maritime history. Looks like we've got 14 people already joined. If you can leave a comment, I'd appreciate it, just so we can see that the comments are working. We are willing to take your questions at the end of the show tonight. You can type them in, and if we have time for them, we will take them. Excellent. So we got some people already chiming in. Welcome, Green Bay, Wisconsin. Good to have you. We don't always see everybody's name on here, but we do see your comments. So thank you. Trinidad, California. Excellent. Thanks, guys. Thanks for chiming in. All right. Well, let's get rolling. A couple of housekeeping things. This is the Great Lakes Shipwrecks live show on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. We are a Facebook community of around 4,000, 5,000 people that are really interested in Great Lakes shipwrecks, and particularly in researching them and new discoveries in technology. Kind of a group for the serious enthusiast to geek level shipwreck person. So thank you to everybody who has made the group the success that I feel it is, and to those of you who regularly share on the group and contribute content. It really means a lot. The show, as you know, I don't hold it during the summer, ostensibly because we're all out on the water. So a little late in getting started this year, just because there's been a lot going on, but glad to finally get things kicked in. So a couple other things. I do have some other guests lined up, but I don't have dates yet. It's going to be at least 2 weeks before we kick off the next show. But this is our kickoff. And tonight I am really pleased to have kind of the man of the season, as it were. It's been a slow season for shipwreck discoveries everywhere except for the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. And so we have their director with us, Bruce Lynn. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Brendan. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and your viewers tonight and be the kickoff, I guess, for your new season here.
Excellent, excellent. We really are glad to have you. It's been an amazing a ride for you guys this season, and I just couldn't imagine that 9 new discoveries in one season. And and it is such an excellent group to be doing it, because the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum is really the museum on the Great Lakes that focuses on these maritime disasters and is really devoted to telling those stories. And what a tremendous organization you have, Bruce.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we had a phenomenal year on a lot of levels. The shipwreck discoveries, which for us, we found shipwrecks in the past, but to find this many in 1 year, that was pretty unusual for us. And we had a very busy museum season at the museum, and new exhibits. And so a lot of things happening this year.
Excellent. Well, Bruce, I'm going to get things kicked off. For those of you who don't know, Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live is an interview show, and it's a show about people. It's not where we do PowerPoint presentations about stuff. It's a show where we get to know people on the Great Lakes and organizations as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hide myself here, and we will Hold on. Bruce, can you hear me okay? Lost my audio.
Can you hear me, Brendan?
Yep, I got you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it kept saying that I was unmuted, and which I thought it was. But either way, if you can hear me now, we're in good shape.
I can. I made a sophomore error. Let's start from where I left off with my question, and I'm going to go ahead and instead of hiding us, I'm just going to stop our video, which is what I should have done. All right. Tell us a little bit about your background, Bruce.
Well, I think, for me, growing up, I grew up on a farm in central Ohio, which is probably not what most of your speakers or most of your people that are involved in maritime history, it's not a place they probably come from. But I grew up on a farm in central Ohio, and I ended up spending a lot of time for my summers anyways. My dad was a teacher, so we ended up coming up north, as we would always say, and spending a lot of time at a small little cabin that we had just south of Whitefish Point. And for me, as a kid growing up on a farm, kind of out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, to be going up to another place that's pretty remote, but had that beauty of the Great Lakes and Lake Superior and Whitefish Bay in particular, for me anyways, I got pretty excited about being in a place like that. It was completely different. That all that ship traffic passing and everything else for us kids going up there was an endless source of fascination. So we would go to places like the Soo Locks. We would tour the Valley Camp. We would see those, the remnants of those lifeboats from the Edmund Fitzgerald, and things like that for a very young person, which I think this would be something that a lot of your viewers could relate to. Seeing things like that were pretty exciting. So it was a regular visit each summer for us. That slide that you just put up, Brendan, that's what Whitefish Point looked like when I first started going up as a kid. So there was still a Coast Guard presence there. If you take a look at that image, you look at the lighthouse keepers on the left, you'll notice the windows are not boarded up, which they were in later years in the 80s when I was going up as a high school student. But that place, that location, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to spend summers up there, was a part of the reason I became so excited about Great Lakes maritime history. I had always been interested in history, period, World War II history, Civil War history, a lot of military history being something that I was interested in. But those trips going up to the cabin and going to places like Whitefish Point and Sault Ste. Marie really started making me think more about maritime history as a subject that I was interested in. I was also a pretty avid reader, and that building you see right there, that's the old Weather Bureau building. That's where our administrative offices are today for the Shipwreck Society. But again, as a kid touring the Soo Locks, that building was pretty well boarded up too, especially when I was in high school. And so I had the opportunity as a child to peek through little slits and boarded up windows, looking both through the windows of the lighthouse keepers' quarters up at Whitefish Point, and also that building, which was built in 1899 at the Soo Locks. And I'm a pretty lucky guy because I was fascinated by those buildings when I was younger, and now I work in both of those. My office is in that corner, kind of the right-hand corner of that the Weather Bureau building you see in that picture. And of course, I spent a lot of time in the keeper's quarters there at Whitefish Point. So that image you're showing right there too, and we'll step back for a minute too. I wanted to speak to the some of the reasons I got into maritime history, where I got focused. It was people like that you see in that picture that helped. But I think I probably share something with a lot of your viewers in that I grew up reading the books about shipwrecks. And I can still remember winter nights in the old farmhouse in Ohio, and the wind is howling outside. And I'm reading a book, Radigan's Great Lakes Shipwrecks and Survivals, as a good example. Or I still have my 1977 copy of The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Fred Stonehouse. Those two books alone really, really captured my fascination. And then I was always on Portage Avenue there as a kid buying copies of Know Your Ships. Every year I've got a pretty good collection of those. So growing up reading those books and, and visiting those locations, I did go into the military after high school, and I was fortunate to be in Germany for 2 years. And I spent a lot of time traveling when I was over there. It was easy to hop on a flight as a soldier if you had the free time and go to places, all over Europe. But we also went to group of friends of mine and I that were history geeks, spent a lot of time in England, went to London a lot, went to Greenwich, and went to the National Maritime Museum there and the Cutty Sark. And really, I would say that I was affected by those visits because I truly got excited about, maritime history, Great Lakes maritime history, certainly, but just maritime history in general. So by the time I got back from being in the Army, it was 1987. And suddenly Whitefish Point, a place that I had kind of had, at least we kids in our family, and, occasionally you'd see somebody else up there, but we kind of felt like we always had that site to ourselves. And when I got up there in 1987, the main building, which is now our main museum gallery, had just been finished a few months earlier. I came at the end of the season, it was probably, who knows, November at that point. And suddenly there was this museum there. And I wasn't exactly happy about that at first, because here was this place that we had that, was kind of our own private little light station, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And, suddenly now there was a museum there. And I guess I never would have thought that I'd have the opportunity to work in that museum. It's kind of an odd, I guess, evolution of my own career. But this picture that you have up, Brendan, this is one of my favorites. This is my grandmother and me standing in Fort Mackinac. So me getting into this career of maritime history, I don't know that I knew that I would exactly get into a career field that involved maritime history, but I certainly hoped that it would. Most of my career was right at that site that you see in that image. That's Fort Mackinac. That's the parade grounds. I started working as a historical interpreter there in 1989, and most of that history that's covered there at the fort is military history, to be sure, but there are aspects of maritime history that are involved as well. Because if you think of any island, particularly a place like Mackinac Island, think of all the steamships, all the passenger steamers that were coming up, freighters that would be passing. Mackinac Island was a resort by the 1880s, 1890s. It was actually the United States' second national park, Michigan's first state park in 1895. So you had a lot of people coming up to stay in the big hotels, and they would be taking those steamships. Think of the Detroit and Cleveland steamship lines. Think of the various competing steamship companies that would be bringing people up from these various Midwest cities and coming to Mackinac Island. So when we would be researching history there at Fort Mackinac, we would also be, in addition to military history and the contingent of the 23rd Infantry Regiment that would have been stationed at Fort Mackinac in the 1880s, you really couldn't not study that maritime history at the same time. And then, of course, working at the fort, we're seeing ships passing constantly. So really that was a starting point for me, Fort Mackinac in 1989, when I first started working there. I just gotten out of the military relatively recently at that point. And so my career was starting in the museum field. And that's really more of the background that I come from to get into maritime history, period. So there was Fort Mackinac for all those years, but we punctuate that. So 1989, I started there, but I was also watching what was happening at Whitefish Point. That was my old stomping grounds. My family still had our little place up there. And I did get to know Tom Farnquist, really the founder of the organization, the visionary that really got things started up there. He clearly wasn't the only one. There was a lot of other people that were involved. And there you can see a picture of the museum right there. That was constructed again in 1987. And that museum, and you see a big crowd walking in there. This past year, if I could just, put this a little bit in there, we had absolutely the busiest year that we've ever had. We had over 80,000 people come through this year. We had some days where we had over 1,200 people come through. It was almost too much on certain days, but we can always sit back and think in terms of all those people coming through and discovering that same history and that developing that same fascination that I had back in '87 when I first went through the museum itself. So in 1996, there was a lot happening there, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the history of the museum. But for myself, it was my first year working at the Shipwreck Museum. There was a lot of excitement that year. The Edmund Fitzgerald bell was just brought up in 1995, and it was now on exhibit inside the main gallery. The Lighthouse Keeper's Quarters had just opened up, and that was where I was. So I was developing an interpretive plan as a part of my museum studies program at Eastern Michigan University, my master's program. And so I went beyond being a visitor at that point in 1996 and became a staff member. And I was really given a lot of leverage at that point to spend time studying and research not only the shipwreck history, but the lighthouse service history, which was something that was really, truly fascinating for me as well. By the way, I have to ask Brendan if you can hear me. I'm seeing some of the comments here. Hopefully, I should ask Brendan, can you hear me okay at this point?
Yeah, I can sure hear you. I was actually going to switch gears a little bit, Bruce. One of the things that I know I wanted to find out about is the museum itself. It started out kind of as Tom Farnquist's baby, and Tom's going to be a guest on the show coming up this season, although I don't have a date inked yet. But I'd like to know a little bit more about, how did this come to be? Because it's an odd thing to have. There are a lot of maritime museums all over the country. But as far as I know, there are very few shipwreck museums. Can you tell us a little bit about, kind of how this came to be, and also about really the vision and the mission of the institution?
That's a really good question, and that's a good. I guess it's a good topic to cover because I agree with you. There's not a lot of specifically shipwreck museums. And one thing that I would say about this museum, and I've studied the history of the organization pretty closely, we still have our development officer, Sean Lay, which many of you might know Sean. He's been with the organization since 1996. He and I both started the same year. I just went back to Mackinac and spent about another 12 years working for the historic parks. But Sean never left, actually. So he's a good organizational historian, I guess, if we can look at it that way. So he and I have talked about this subject a lot. And I think it is kind of a unique history to this organization. We mentioned Tom Farnquist, and he truly was the visionary to get all of this going in so many of the big projects in the history of this organization. But it wasn't just him, as I alluded to earlier. There was a big group of founding fathers and mothers, people like Richard Monesto. That's a good image right there, Brendan. So you could see Tom on the left. You could see Larry Elliott. He was one of the founding fathers of the organization. Anybody from the Flint area would know Larry because he was a TV anchor person for WJRT, I think, if I have that correctly, that was down there in Flint. Gary Schumbarger to the right of Larry, and then Richard Monesto is on the far right. So this picture, I think, does a great job of really summing up, I guess, the original intent of the organization was you had teachers, you had divers, you had historians coming together. In 1978, the organization was given its 501c3 status. So, but prior to that, guys like the four that you see here, and Shirley Farnquist too, who was Tom's wife, they worked really hard to be out there searching for these shipwrecks, discovering shipwrecks. But the idea was also coming along to interpret the history behind a lot of these shipwrecks as well. There's another view, Richard Monesto, you can see right there, again, one of the founding fathers. He's got the dive suit on. But in the foreground there is Terry Banache. I think probably a lot of your viewers would know Terry Banache. Terry was our site manager. He was the board president for a number of years, particularly when I first started. He's just an all-around great guy. He's one of our favorite people, and he's currently on our board of directors and head of our nominations committee as well. But going back to the history of the organization, if you look at just a few dates, and I'm not always a person that likes to throw dates around a whole lot, but I think they're kind of important in the history of the organization. It was 78 when the 501c3 status was granted to the Shipwreck Society. So the Shipwreck Society is the the umbrella organization, if I could put it that way, that owns and operates a number now of historic sites, and some we only just recently added. But it was 78 that everything really got started. 1982 was kind of an important year too. Dennis Hale actually spoke at the Shipwreck Society annual meeting and dinner. And in a lot of ways, Dennis, we all got to know Dennis. We all loved having Dennis come up and visit the museum. But this kind of started things on a little bit of a track as well, because now, we were also doing more to tell those stories and bring people in like Dennis that had a firsthand experience who actually survived a shipwreck. So that was 82. 1983, the Coast Guard actually granted permission to the Shipwreck Society to have a 25-year lease to operate a museum there. And then by 1985, you have both Tom Farnquist and Jim Kelly. And there's one image, if you could find it, Brendan, that shows them just 3 nights ago. There you go. That one right there. I love that picture. I just took that a few nights ago. And Tom and Jim Kelly. So Jim he was the former director of exhibits at the Milwaukee Public Museum. So that's Jim Kelly on the left, and then Tom Farnquist on the right. And they're sitting inside that main gallery that they both developed between the research, the stories, working with the state of Michigan to get those artifacts in there, and then the panels that are throughout that gallery. I don't expect that everybody has been through the Shipwreck Museum before who's a viewer here tonight, but I think probably a lot of you have. And that formula that is in that main gallery, I think, is magical. We've added a little bit to it since I've been there, or since I started in this position in 2011, but not much. We wanted to keep that formula of, there you go. That was a good one. Just going back one, Brendan, showing there you go. So you've got a combination of artifacts. You've got a combination of stories that are truly captivating and well written. You've got original artwork. You've got historic photographs. You've got artifacts that in some cases are the only remaining, in some cases, the only artifact of its kind, I guess, left anywhere. Kind of like that. If you look at the image there, and it's always kind of a toss-up, which is the centerpiece of the museum. We like to say the Edmund Fitzgerald bell is the centerpiece, but there's a lot of lighthouse geeks, if we want to, and I'm one of them myself, that like to come up and visit lighthouses all over northern Michigan or all over the Great Lakes. But that massive Fresnel lens you see behind the Edmund Fitzgerald bell, the Fitzgerald bell is in the foreground, the lens is in the background. That's the largest size Fresnel lens ever used on the Great Lakes. It's a second order. It's kind of an unusual type. It's a bivalve. And then there's a fourth order lens on the left. And then you've got the Eagle from the Vienna on the right, which unfortunately is not with us anymore. That Eagle was on loan to us from Sioux Historic Sites. And now our good friends over there at the Valley Camp, which that Valley Camp was one of the big objects that got me excited about maritime history. You can see that Vienna Eagle on exhibit inside the Valley Camp today. We've replaced it. We've worked with the state of Michigan. We have the Safe from the Indiana now. It's not quite as pretty, but I do think it's pretty interesting.
So Bruce, one of the things I wanted to ask about is the society. So the museum is one thing that you can go and attend, but you can also join the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society as a member, can't you? And of course, a little self-serving, the cover of the recent issue is from my collection. Can you tell us a little bit about how one joins and what does the society do? And tell us about your excellent publication.
Well, certainly, yeah. So, well, thank you for that compliment, and thank you for the use of the image as well. That's the Western Reserve. That's our most recent shipwreck journal that came out in the spring. The journal is just a part of your membership benefits. So we have a lot of people. We probably have just under 1,000 members at this point. Wow. That are part of the Shipwreck Society. It's interesting how those numbers fluctuate too. I think nonprofits, all over the country probably are wrestling with membership and maintaining those numbers. But we have a very devoted membership. I'll say that. We see that in a lot of different ways. But a big part of becoming a member would be, of course, free admission to the museum. Heck, you could come up and go through every day if you wanted to. There's no limit on the number of, unlimited, I guess, visitation of the museum. You get discounts in the store. One time you got a discount staying in the cruise quarters. That's our little B&B that we did have on site. You're noticing that I'm using past tense at this point because that's staff housing at this point, and probably will stay so in perpetuity. But we're cooking up some interesting different programs for next year that will be for members only. So there's a number of different benefits, and I think we're pretty inexpensive as far as membership. You could get an individual membership for $30 and a family membership for $50. And
you can just join online, right, on the website?
Exactly. Yep, that's right. So you go right on to shipwreckmuseum.com, and you can find out that information for membership, and you can see what we're working on. I will say we're just getting ready to start on a new website. We would have done that. We were supposed to have this done last year, but the pandemic, as so many other things, has caused us a lot of delays, including our shipwreck journal. Our printer had ours for about 4 months, and we're working with Chris Winters now. I know a lot of you know Chris. I know he was one of your guests, Brendan, and he's doing the design for our shipwreck journal now. So that alone should probably make you want to join up.
And it's not just a little staple-bound thing. And this is like a regular glossy production magazine. It's just wonderful. I hadn't had a copy recently, and for many years. And when I got that one, I was like, "Holy smokes! This is for $30. You could charge that for just one issue of it." But Bruce, I want to ask about the museum's upcoming exhibits and what's been going on. Tell us some new stuff at the museum, because I know there's a lot of stuff in the works there that you guys have been doing. Tell us about some of the highlights of what we can expect in the future, and what you've accomplished lately.
Certainly, yeah. So we do have a lot going on, and we've had a lot of projects that have been underway for a number of years, and I think a lot of them are going to be coming together this year. I have to mention, we just opened up an exhibit last year dedicated to the Daniel J. Morrell, and particularly to its crew. Dennis Hale was a big supporter of ours, and he was a friend of ours, probably more importantly. And he, after Dennis passed away, his wife, Barb Hale, donated pretty much his entire collection to us, archival artifacts, you name it, a lot of artwork, a lot of interesting things were donated. And so we worked with Barb. Chris Winters was a part of this, a gentleman by the name of John DeBeck and Dave Trotter, Chris Winters again, Corey Atkins, Becky Kagan-Schott, Robert McGreevy. There's a whole group of people that helped by either making certain donations or helping on the committee to bring this exhibit together. But we just opened it up this last August and had an event where we invited a lot of family members, surviving family members from the Daniel J. Morrell. So we had a lot of people. We had almost 700 people come through that day, but a couple hundred of them were related to the Morrell. So that was a big thing, opening up that exhibit, because we had worked on it for a long time. We had planned on opening it up last year, and finally, matter of fact, I think you've got an image in there, Brendan, somewhere that gives you kind of a glimpse of the of that particular exhibit. So that was a big one. There you go. That shot right there, you can see that's opening day right there, and it's in our old theater, or what is technically the old U.S. Navy radio building that was built in 1920. So that building is becoming a changing exhibit gallery, and we have a new exhibit that's going to be coming online in that building, in addition to this Morrell exhibit, an exhibit dedicated to the 1903 shipwreck of the A.A. Parker, which I think probably a lot of you are familiar with too. There you go. That's the Parker in happier days, I guess you could put it that way. Pat Labadie, who I know has been a guest of yours as well, shared that and a number of other photos. He's on our board of directors. We're so fortunate to have a great board, and people like C. Patrick Labadie, who we kind of jokingly call him Gandalf sometimes. He is he is the guy. He and Fred Stonehouse, among others, we will go to often, and Rick Mixter as well. But we'll open up an exhibit this year. We have a model that Ted McCutcheon built. If any of you know Ted, he's a master model builder. A lot of the models that are inside the main gallery now that have been there since 1987, Ted built. And then we also have a model of the S.R. Kirby, which is a shipwreck we found back in 1918 and positively identified in 1919, because a part of the Parker exhibit is also going to deal with our ongoing marine operations. So that's an exhibit that's going to be coming online, as I said, for next year. That's going to be new. That right there. This is something I get completely excited about, and I'm very much a geek when it comes to these things. That is a motor lifeboat type TR, 36-footer that Whitefish Point had back in the 30s and 40s. If any of you are familiar with these boats, this one was, they each had a number. This was 36371, and that was the original Whitefish Point. It wasn't the first motor lifeboat. It was actually the second. There was a type H that we had up there as well. But we don't have that particular motor lifeboat. We have another one that we found with the help, and that's it right there. That one is 10 hull numbers away from the original we had at Whitefish Point, and that is 36381. That one is exactly the same. It's a type TR, and it was sitting out. It spent most of its career out at Cape May, New Jersey, and that one was sitting out in a boatyard of all places in Tall Timbers, Maryland. And it was about to be burned by the owner of the yard so he could get all of the various hardware off of it that he could sell, brass and copper and whatever. But that thing, as you see it there, it's sitting in that boatyard. And Jeff Shook, if any of you know of Jeff is a good friend of the organization, and he is a collector of motor lifeboats and surf boats. I think he's got like 3 motor lifeboats himself. He was a technical advisor for that movie, The Finest Hours, if any of you have ever seen that before. Part of our motor lifeboat, they actually wanted to borrow ours. I say they, it was Disney that produced that film, and they wanted to borrow our motor lifeboat within a week of us getting it. And I wasn't excited about that because we had some donors. A gentleman by the name of Dave Sutton actually donated almost all of the cost to get that motor lifeboat. And then we had another gentleman by the name of Glenn Cathers, who lives out in Washington, and he's rebuilt several of these motor lifeboats. He made a big donation as well and donated a lot of his time and technical expertise to us. So I wasn't excited about just turning this thing over to a movie studio, but I did turn over the one thing they begged us for, which was comical, was the wheel, the ship's wheel off of that motor lifeboat. So we loaned them that, but that motor lifeboat has come a long way. And it's at a place called Murtaugh Boat Works down in Hessel, Michigan. And that's it now. Much of the hardware is on the deck. You can't really see it that well. Very tight confines when they're working on it, but they're doing a cosmetic restoration of it. We're not going to have that thing back in the water again. I mean, it weighs about 18,000 pounds. It's 36 feet long. We're not going to be taking that thing out into the water, but it is going to be part of our motor lifeboat house, which is another project. There you go. That is another big project we've been working on for a few years. Some people who have been visitors to the museum have noticed this building that has been closed to the public. This is what it looked like back in 2011. That's the year I started in this position. And we all wanted that building. We knew that was one of the original lifeboat station buildings, and that's part of the history that we interpret. Well, we need to do a better job of interpreting that history. We have a surf boat house that's up there at Whitefish Point. We interpret heavily the life-saving service along the shipwreck coast, but we only have one interpretive panel that relates to the Coast Guard lifeboat station that was at Whitefish Point from 1923 up until the early 1950s. So we've been working on this building. We moved it in 2013, and then it's been slow going. We've been raising money as we've been going to restore it. This is what it looked like back in 2011. This is what it looked like when we started the restoration. This is what it looks like now. The building is reversed. So you looked at that other building, you saw 2 big, massive, open doors that a motor lifeboat and a surf boat could go in and out of and go right down into the water. But what this building is going to be, and again, I'm very excited about this. This is going to be our new theater. So, wow. It's going to work out well. Although I will say, Brendan, when the motor lifeboat gets inside of that building, it's going to be an overwhelming presence inside of that building because it's a
small
tight
theater.
What's that?
Small theater.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we'll have more seating than our old theater did in the old Navy radio building, but not by much. We were hoping for a lot more, but because of the way this is going to work out, But it's a beautiful building now. We use it. We used to host a half marathon, 5K, 10K, which was a fundraiser for us for ongoing historic preservation at Whitefish Point. We did stop that after 10 years of doing it. We may bring it back at some point, but we would have inside that building. We'd do the awards ceremonies. We had speakers. Frank Mays, before he passed away this last year, Frank would come up and speak every year, and Roger Hewlett. And we've just had a myriad of different speakers come in, and that's been such a good space for that. So it's a good lecture space. It's going to be a theater, and it's also going to have exhibits dedicated to the lifeboat station that used to be at Whitefish Point.
Good deal. So one of the things that you were telling me about is this amazing lighthouse, and the museum is going to get this lighthouse?
So we are, yeah. This is another big, exciting new development, and we may live to regret some of these projects that we're that we're taking on at this point. But this is a lighthouse that I would be willing to wager that even the vast majority of lighthouse enthusiasts have never seen before. It's very remote. It's on Grand Island, so think about taking your pictured rocks cruises, and those boats would leave Munising, and often you'll cruise past this old wooden lighthouse. It looks like it hasn't had a paint job for 50 years. Yeah. Well, you probably have seen that yourself, Brendan, I'm sure.
Sure.
And I think probably a lot of the viewers have too. But this one is on the northern tip of Grand Island, and it's up on a bluff that's over 200 feet high. It is theoretically the highest above sea level lighthouse in the country. And we were given this lighthouse. It was donated to us by a couple by the name of Lauren and Pat Graham, and they are an amazing couple. They're in their mid 80s, and they're still driving their old late 60s, early 70s Toyota Land Cruiser to go to their other cabin on Grand Island. But they took Corey Atkins, the vice president of the organization, and myself up there a couple times. I think they even took Tom Farnquist back in the day up there to take a look at it. But we have just this last year accepted this as a donation. So it's really one big artifact, but it also has a lot of artifacts inside it. When the Grahams took over this building and they got it from the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company in 1972, it was a shell of a building. And I think, a lot of us that are interested in lighthouse history, this is not an unusual story. A lighthouse gets decommissioned by the lighthouse or the Coast Guard, and vandals get in and do a lot of damage. And that was very much the case with this lighthouse. And the Grahams took it over and they restored it within a couple of years, and they've maintained it. And we are incredibly fortunate, and they are incredibly generous to donate this to us. They included an endowment with it as well. And we're now working with the United States Forest Service, because this is all Grand Island National Recreation Area at this point. Sure. So we'll be working with the Forest Service, but we've done a lot of work on it. And let me step that back. They've done a lot of work on it, and we've done some basic work, inventory of the artifacts and the archival materials, a lot of mowing, a lot of trimming. Wild mint has gotten out of control and practically overtaken much of the grounds, but it's still like Whitefish Point. It's still an operating light station too. There's a tower up on a pole. So,
well, Bruce, one of the things that makes your organization unique among all the organizations that are on the Great Lakes, and my shameless plug, of course, many of you are familiar with the Association for Great Lakes Maritime History, AGLAMA. It's an umbrella organization that includes every maritime museum and historical society on the Great Lakes. There's over 100 institutional members. I only know of one institution that owns a research vessel designed for shipwreck hunting and goes out and looks for shipwrecks. And that's your group. And you have an amazing vessel with some amazing technology. And I think the folks that are in this group would be particularly interested in hearing about this. Tell us about the David Boyd and tell us about its capabilities and equipment.
Right. So, you are correct, Brendan, too. I think it does make us pretty unique. I'm in a lot of museum groups, and I know a lot of museums that might have exhibits dedicated to shipwrecks. But I think we are pretty unique in that sense. And this goes back to the origins of the organization itself. It started with that mission of searching for, discovering, and documenting shipwrecks. And that is something that we're still doing. The slide that you see there, that is the David Boyd. That's a former United States Army Corps of Engineers research vessel. And under my predecessor, we were able to obtain this boat as well as a few others. There was one that was called the Antiquarian, which for the longest time was the vessel that we used. That was a former Coast Guard vessel. In that case, I think it was about 40 feet long, but this one's just under 50 feet long, and it's certainly not the fastest boat in the world, but it's a good platform for towing sonar, for launching an ROV. I think we all wish, and I'm not out there as much as I'd like to be on that vessel, but when we're out there are times when you wish it could go a little faster, that we could get, maybe about 10 knots is about as good as it gets with this particular vessel. But it is big. And in that image that you see right there, I don't know how well you can all see it. There you go. So on the right there, you can see our Director of Marine Operations. That's Daryl Ertel. And then on the left is his brother, Dan Ertel. And they really were kind of a dynamic duo, if I could put it that way, out there this year. They were covering a lot of territory, on the David Boyd. We had a lot of people coming out to help us this year, which was super helpful. Rick Mixter, Dan Fountain, I was able to get out there a lot. Fred Stonehouse, Sarah Wildy, our operations manager. We had a lot of help, and we had people who were very interested. And that's, again, an area where I think we're pretty fortunate. People are excited about what we do. And so we get a lot of people, at least this year we did, to come out and help. And I think a natural question is probably going to be, and maybe I don't want to jump to this yet, Brendan, about why I think we did so well this year. But let me speak real quickly to what technology we were using out there. I'm not an engineer, but I have been able to work with Daryl and Dan and this equipment, and Sarah as well. We have a side scan sonar that was built by a company called Marine Sonic Technology. They're out of Yorktown, Virginia. Daryl and I were able to go out there a few years ago, and even predating that, Marine Sonic Technology and a gentleman by the name of Creighton Fenn had built a towfish and a sonar that this organization had used for years. There you can see a nice image. That's from our Ghosts of the Shipwreck Coast publication, but it does a good job showing. You can see our towfish right there. You can also see our ROV, but that's John DeMille. You can see there looking like he's just about to grab a hold of that towfish. And that image is slightly out of perspective because that towfish is pretty big, and it doesn't look quite as big because it's a little further away from the camera. Chris Winters would have taken that photograph too, and he designed that particular publication. But using that Marine Sonic technology this year, and it was newer technology than what we had when I first started, and working with those engineers out there in Yorktown, we were really able to dial this thing in this year. And again, my hat is off to Daryl particularly, but Dan too, for much of the work that he did when they were out there. So using the sonar, if we used it at its full capability, we could see about a mile out on each side of our water column. Most of the time, more like a half a mile. And depending on whether we see some kind of an anomaly, we could lower the towfish a little bit and then, switch up the frequency and get a closer look, at what we might think we're seeing. You can be out there for hours at a time. Our crew can be out there covering over 100 miles a day. And we have some people that, as much as they love our mission, they're not as excited about being out there for 14 or 15 hours on the Boyd, which is not plush.
It can be boring. It can be boring too. People think it's all excitement, and it's not.
Exactly. That's right. I mean, for me, it's funny. I don't get out, like I said, as much as I'd like to, because most of my days, that is the busiest time of year for us. So, I'm in my office a lot, and I would much rather be out on the water. But sometimes that isn't always possible. But yeah, Brendan, like you say, it's not always the most exciting thing because you're not going out every day and finding shipwrecks. But there were days this year where we'd go out a couple days in a row and find shipwrecks each time. This year for me, and Fred Stonehouse happened to be on board with us when we found a ship at the end of this grid, practically out in the middle of Lake Superior. And it was pretty darn exciting there. There's Daryl Ertel right there. Daryl's our Director of Marine Operations. He's pointing out one of the vessels. I can't see that closely enough to see which one that might have been, but we were fortunate that we had a lot of wrecks to choose from this year. And, keeping up with that, keeping the shipwreck straight. We try to share this with the media. We're still getting information we're going to be putting on our website here real soon. We're still reviewing, footage from our ROV and sonar imagery. So if the marine sonic technology was one part of that equation, the other part would have been our ROV, because a lot of these shipwrecks were in over 600 feet of water, and that's pretty darn deep. There is our ROV right there, and that's on the deck of the David Boyd. It's getting to be a pretty old unit. That's a deep ocean engineering Phantom S4. It's big, it's heavy, it takes a whole crew to launch it. We're fortunate again. Dan has a lot of experience, has gotten a lot of experience. Dan Ertel, Daryl's got a huge amount of experience, and Sarah Wildy, our operations manager, is great at handling that tether when the ROV is down there as well. And there were a number of others that were able to get a lot of experience working with that. But so in a situation where you don't want to put a diver in harm's way, and particularly for something that might be 600 feet, or like the SR Kirby a few years ago that was in over 800 feet of water, having that ability to put that ROV, and that thing can go down to 1,000 feet. I'm not sure we necessarily want to put it down there, because this unit is over 20 years old, but it does still work for us, and it works very well. So that's another part of our actual, I guess, technology that we're using to find these wrecks. There you can see the David Boyd again there in the background as well. There's is that you, Brendan, right there?
That's me. That's at Copper Harbor a couple of years ago. I threw that in kind of as an aside. That's my side scan envy slide. That's my deep vision little eye, which is actually an archaeological sonar. It's made for high resolution scanning in shallower water. We happened to be there. We were doing the wrecks of the Wasaga and looking for the debris from the Superior out by the lighthouse there from 1860. And lo and behold, there was the David Boyd, and we couldn't resist the cameo. But it does give you a good view of the size of that Marine Sonics towfish. And the size of the David Boyd compared to what we were using.
Well, let me say this, Brendan, and the next time you see us in Copper Harbor, and that may be next year, you're always welcome to join us. We'd love to have you on board, and really, we could always use crews. So for viewers out there, I'm never going to promise the weather, and Brendan, you know this well, that you never can quite tell what's going to happen out on Lake Superior, but yeah, we'd love to have you on board, certainly.
Well, Bruce, let's talk about some of the finds this year. So, it's just an amazing year. And obviously we can't talk about all 9 of the things that were found, because a lot of them you're still, out there ground truthing and still working on. But so far, I know of at least 4 or 5 that you guys have gotten some pretty solid data on and been able to put a name to. So let's walk through them. Tell us a little bit about how you found them and what happened with them.
Well, let me say this, Brendan. It's almost like a miracle year here as far as finding this many wrecks. And we have found some, like this image you see here of the Adela Shores, that are ships that just sailed away. They're ships that disappeared with their entire crew, never to be seen again. And we worked with Fred Stonehouse to republish his Lake Superior Shipwreck Coast book, which is kind of a Bible for our staff. And I was thumbing through it here the other day, and the Adela Shores, of course, is one that's listed, or at least in that book when that was published, as a ship that just disappeared. But let me step back for 1 minute. I think there's a combination of factors here that I think led to some of the success that we had here this year, for sure. The weather, for one, cooperated, I think, like it's rarely if ever cooperated before. So we had great weather this year. We had equipment that was working. So our sonar was really getting dialed in, working with marine sonic technology, and Daryl, and his learning that system better. That was a big part of it. We did have a consistent crew this year, which sometimes has been a challenge for us. And then the homework that Daryl did, and working with people like Mike Spears and Pat Labadie and Rick Mixter and Fred Stonehouse and others to help us with our research. Daryl did a lot of work this last winter to really target some of the areas where we think these ships might have disappeared or where they might be. So you put those factors together, and now we're finding shipwrecks like the Adela Shores. We're finding shipwrecks like the Dot, which, to be frank, unless you memorized every single shipwreck in Fred's book, Lake Superior Shipwreck Coast, you may have never heard of. We found the Frank Wheeler. Maybe some people down in Bay City, people like Ron Bloomfield would know about it, but not as famous as Shipwreck. This is the Curtis you can see right there, the CF Curtis. So that's an image we have from our sonar. So we're dialing it in there a little bit more, towfish getting a little bit lower. And when we're able to use that high frequency, we can get more of a close-up, and you can see that in this particular case, the Curtis, which went down in November of 1914, really an interesting story. That ship is in pretty good shape, and some of the hatch covers are still in place on it. And really those steamers that we found this year, by and large, were relatively intact. And that vessel has a great story going along with it too, which each one of them do. I point this out. I try to point this out every year, every November the 10th, and we do our Edmund Fitzgerald Memorial Ceremony at Whitefish Point. So many people are tied to that story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it is a fascinating story, no question. And it is really the shipwreck that most people know about, and it's one of the primary reasons they come to the museum. But every one of these shipwrecks, like the Curtis, like the Adela Shores, like the Western Reserve, like, not that we found that one this year, but that's certainly one we were looking for. Like all these other wrecks that are out there, is that each one of them had a crew. And in those most tragic shipwrecks where you lost the entire crew, they're no different than that crew of the Fitzgerald. They were men and women in some cases that were out doing a job, and each one has their own story to tell. So, the Curtis, that went down a year after the Great Storm of 1913. 1914, that one disappeared. The end of November had two schooner barges that it was towing, and they were all lost. So it's a very dramatic story. And here we are in 2021, and through our ROV and through those cameras, we're able to be the first eyes to really take a look at this wreck. And it's an amazing story. Rick Mixter was on board when we were looking at some of this footage. And the cool thing about it, and this is what separates Lake Superior. And so those of us up on Lake Superior, in a lot of ways, I think we're pretty darn spoiled, because if you say, look at some of the shipwrecks that they're finding down in the Thunder Bay, National Marine Sanctuary, those ships are encrusted with zebra mussels and quagga mussels and everything else. So your visibility underwater is greater, but when you get up close, you can't necessarily see those wrecks like we can see them today. And there's a really good one, which might be in these slides, that shows that you couldn't see the name CF Curtis very closely. This is actually the Frank Wheeler, which is a schooner barge that sank. There's the Michigan. But there's another close-up of the Curtis. But you can see the Edward Hines Company on the side of the hull. You can actually see the letters. You can see the name clearly with the paint still visible. You can see the different colors of these vessels in some cases.
Sure.
And so right there is the dot. So that's another sonar image. I'm not sure how many of the viewers, Brendan, have ever heard of the dot. I know I'd read about it when I read through Fred's book.
Well, I think a number of our viewers will have heard of her.
Good. That's good. Well, you've got an astute and well-read audience, because it's really not one that most people have ever heard of before. But again, most people haven't heard a lot of these wrecks, including the Adela Shores, including the CF Curtis, which are two what I consider to be more noteworthy and probably famous shipwrecks that we were fortunate enough to locate this year.
So with the dot here, Bruce, what are we looking at? I noticed that we have a hull outline on the top, but then there seems to be like some cables running down and then a bunch of superstructure, is it? What are we looking at? Do you know?
That could very well be that. So the hull, you look at the upper part there, the hull is relatively intact, but yeah, there's probably part of the superstructure. There might be part of a chain or something that's separating the two. And we have another sonar image that I was able to show a few nights ago with the gales of November for a program that I did for that. And you could see the distance from a different angle, I guess.
Gotcha.
Showing that. But the dot, again, is an interesting story. It ties into Whitefish Point in a couple different ways, because for those of you who visited the Shipwreck Museum, you will recall seeing the rudder, pretty good sized rudder out there from the MM Drake, which is a steamship that's also connected to another shipwreck we found this year. But the Drake was towing the dot when the dot started taking on water. And then what ended up happening was that the captain on board the Dot let the captain on board the Drake know, hey, we're in trouble, and we need a little bit of help here, because we're thinking our vessel is going to sink out from underneath us. So this may not sound like the most exciting shipwreck story in the world, but if you're on board the Dot when you think it's going to sink, to see that Drake turn around and come back and pick you up off of your vessel before it sinks, that's exactly what happened with the Dot. And there you could see part of the hull and what are quite probably anchor chains that are connecting another part of the vessel itself. That's in over 300 feet of water. Here's another vessel. Now let's hold on that slide for a minute, because the Michigan, which I think is a little more famous of a wreck probably than the Dot, this one went down in 1901, but it too was being towed by the Drake. So there's an interesting connection here. Similar story. The Michigan, which was a relatively new schooner barge at that point, being towed by the Drake, but similar situation. The Michigan starts taking on water. They, the crew, the captain on board the Michigan signals the captain of the Drake, hey, we're in trouble here. We need some help. So the Drake comes back around, takes the crew off of the Michigan, but shortly after they get the entire crew of the Michigan off of the Drake, off the Michigan onto the Drake, the Michigan smashes into the Drake, tears off the smokestack, tears off some of the cabins on the deck, smashes part of the pilot house. And with that smokestack being taken off, now the Drake doesn't have any steam pressure. They don't have any power. So they're now out there in that same storm. And now you've got both crews. Think of the crew from the Michigan. They're probably breathing a sigh of relief. But minutes later, now they're like, oh my God, here we go again. But fortunately for the combined crews of the Michigan and the Drake, you have two other big steel steamers that are out there, the Northern Wave and the Crescent City, and they're able to get close enough. They get the combined crews off, and they get back to Sault Ste. Marie, but they have a problem. When they get back there, they realize that the cook from the Michigan, neither ship had him. And so somewhere along the line, this guy by the name of Harry Brown, and this is so memorable to me because you research these newspaper articles from back in the day, and the conflicting, and I know you've got a lot of researchers, I think, that are viewers on board this group, and you find these conflicting stories, and how can they be so dramatically different? But one newspaper article had this cook, Harry Brown from the Michigan, getting crushed between the hull of the Michigan the Drake and one of those other steel steamers. But most of the rest of them just say that somehow he got left behind on the Drake before it sank. But either way, he was the one casualty of those two wrecks. The Drake sank soon thereafter and was discovered by the Shipwreck Society back in 1978. So it's an interesting combination of shipwreck stories, and it kind of takes us back to the beginnings of the organization. There's the deck cabin from the Frank Wheeler. You can still see a pane of glass there in there. And then there's the other image, Brendan, that shows right there. So you can see part of an old pot-bellied stove that's inside that cabin. There's bunks behind it. There's a bench you can see turned over there. There's a stool. And the cool thing about this is when you look at this image, you're getting little snapshots of what at one time, before the Wheeler sank in 1885, that was everyday life for the crew on board that ship. And just those little things that we can all kind of, I guess, connect with and understand and relate to. This would have been a cabin on board the deck, and that would have been a living quarters for some of those crew members. So we've been able to get some really great imagery. We've got some good sonar imagery, but like you pointed out a minute ago, Brendan, we're still reviewing a lot of that. There's one shipwreck that when Fred Stonehouse and I were on board, that's on the far end of one of our biggest grids. Again, it's practically out in the middle of Lake Superior. We've not been able to identify it yet. I'm just going to say it's one of the French minesweepers at this point, but and it's probably not. So, but who knows? Maybe we'll find out next year.
It could be. You never know. There's a lot of ships that just could be anywhere out there. And it is interesting that there's so many possible targets. My personal favorite, the one that I've always been interested in, is the Western Reserve, and I've rewritten her, re-researched her and written her up again, sort of from a fresh perspective. And it's one that it's way out there, but one that I'd go out with you guys for sure, despite the fact that it's a long boat trip, a long way from shore. So Bruce, we are just about on the hour, and I really want to thank you for coming and sharing with us not only the recent finds of the shipwrecks, but the museum and what's been going on there, because it is truly kind of a unique museum, particularly to people who are members of this group. It's a very important institution on the Great Lakes because it's the shipwreck museum, So it's been an excellent walkthrough, kind of what the museum is about, what the society is about, and what you guys are doing. What a unique organization that you are, fortunate enough to steward. And thank you so much for spending the evening with us.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciated the opportunity to speak with you and be a part of this program. And thanks again to all of your viewers for tuning in too. And it's an honor because I know a lot of the people you've had that have been on your program. And so I'm honored just to be a part of this. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thanks again, Bruce. And I wanted to let everybody know that we are going to have a post-show Zoom room social. It's going to start at 8:15 Central, 9:15 Eastern. I will post the link to the Zoom room as soon as this session ends. I'll post it on the group. Feel free to join us. Bring your favorite adult beverage. Bruce will be there to join us for your Q&A and for general just socialization and fun times. Couple of housekeeping things. Like I say, I don't have the next show booked yet, but 2 to 3 weeks out, probably it'll be. Got quite a few people that have agreed to be on the show. We just have to get them penciled in. If you'd like to be on the show, drop me a note. I'm always looking for new guests who have done interesting or unusual things on the Great Lakes. You don't have to be a pioneering figure. Happy to have people from different institutions to tell the story of your institution too. And as always, thank you to everybody who posts on our group and our active members. Please keep the excellent content coming and tell your friends about the group. Always happy to have new people join. I have had to institute some tight controls, though. It is a private group because otherwise we end up getting spammed to death. And I've had to get a little bit more restrictive about the membership questions. So people should answer the membership questions if you ask to join the group, because I ask, they're pretty simple. Name a shipwreck on the Great Lakes. Why do you want to be a member of the group, and do you agree to the rules? And you'd be surprised how many people I get from other countries who are really just trolling for trying to get your friend list so they can, ghost your profile. So be aware of that. We do get a lot of that on the group. So I try to be pretty tight about who I let in. Anyway, thanks again, everybody. Thank you so much, Bruce. And looking forward to seeing everybody in 15 minutes on the group. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you, Bruce. If you can just stick around, Bruce.